Is he there?
Is he muted?
I don't know. I don't see him there. Brother Jonathan?
Hopefully my fire is not too loud. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for all the wonderful blessings of this Sabbath day. We thank you for your presence. We welcome you and praise you, Lord. And we pray that you'll continue to be with us through the rest of this day, the rest of our studies. Bless each person here and their families represented. And we pray that you'll continue to guide us in all your ways. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. It's always interesting what your fire sounds like through us. Huh?
I wish I had that fire near me.
It's the same thing.
I love the crackle. I'm not gonna lie. I don't like heat, but I do like fires and being close to them. I like when you go camping. I always love that.
Yeah. Sister Christina, you didn't have the heater on this morning.
Yes, I did.
Oh, you did? I didn't
And Jana said,
I didn't feel it.
Oh.
yes, same number.
Yeah, you may pull this up. There we go. And somebody else have to watch the chat because I can't see it when we're on here.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay. Back to God. And yes, it was a really good discussion. And it's interesting and a blessing to watch the growth in all of us to know what God is doing. And that song was perfect. And understanding that it's his love that he wants to show, because it's his love that is going to draw people unto himself. The cross is going to draw people unto himself, and we just need to be willing people, surrendered to him, and let him do the work, and he's going to do amazing things for people. Who would have ever thought? Bless you.
Thank you.
Okay, move a couple things off the screen. Okay, so just real quick, a little bit of reviews. We've covered Acts 27 in 3 presentations, and we laid out that history of both the ships. Everybody remembers Acts 27 and the 2 ships, and both representing Adventism and the SDA Church. One of those ships is the good ship, and one of those is the bad ship that chooses to abide in death. This study then took us to a study of the King of the South. We drew some other lessons. We talked about the 5th line, judgment on the structures, and that was the line of the ship being the line of the judgment on the structures or the institutions. We're going to come back to specific points of that study, particularly 1863, where everything goes wrong. But the real purpose was to head into a study of the King of the South. So we took the number 273 and we began to study the South. It took us to the history of Pyrrhus, and that was what our subject matter was in our last study. In Elder Parmenter's class, he's been expanding on the concept of, and this is a Guadalupe presentation, so it would be back in, I think it was a camp meeting, she's referring to what he taught there.
Water on there or something. Water bottle to spray.
Yeah.
Where's your water bottle at?
We need somebody to mute, right?
Yeah.
Somebody want to mute? I'm not sure who it was.
Renee, Donna, Renee.
Oh, okay.
Looking for water bottles.
Okay. Okay, so the real purpose was to head us into the study of the King of the South. So we took the number 273 and we began to study the South. It took us to the history of Pyrrhus, and that was our subject matter with our last study. In Elder Parmenter's class, he's been expanding on the concept of an alpha and omega and how we construct those. We are already familiar with them just in our study of Millerite history. Even on that level, I think everyone understands that we are repeating Millerite history. But to say that it's a repeat and to leave it at that level, it becomes a little too simple. And the problem with too simple is that you can draw some wrong conclusions. And I think that was, in a roundabout way, something that was touched on last night as well. I don't know if it was part of the subject was last night, but anyways, I'll continue on. Maybe we'll refer to that later. So we're going to cover some Millerite history and explain that concept. But to remind us, we have a history of failure and a history of success. So we saw that there was a history of failure and a history of success, and also in modern Israel as well. modern Dublin. Yeah. So we have history of failure and a history of success. And this is one pattern. By bringing it into God's people, it would say beginning and end of ancient Israel. Here we could say the beginning and the end of the King of the South, but it's the same concept. And then we come into this history, and it is the beginning and the end for the King of the South. But on another level, another perspective, World War II in our history, USSR and Russia against Germany and the USA. So we have two histories for the King of the South. This was back in the time of Pyrrhus. Why am I drawing a blank for how to refer to it? But the King of the South in the past. Am I looking at? Why am I saying that wrong? Modern.
We don't have one for that.
Here we don't have one for that. Maybe that's why I'm drawing a blank, thinking I'm messing up here. Okay, so we had a history for the King of the South. You have a history of failure, and you have a history of success. Pyrrhus comes in two parts, and also then you have the King of the South. He comes in two parts as well. In modern day, as I guess I'm trying to think of how to say that, in our day when it refers to God's people. So you have history of the King of the South.
Too many kings of the South in the old that we make application of. You can't
Put it, yeah.
just
So
Pyrrhus.
So in our day, then you also have a line of failure and a line of success. The papacy was involved in the history of World War II, and it's involved in our history. We laid it out in this manner to make a specific point. When we come to the parable teaching, we take a story and line it up with another story, and we compare and contrast, and that's what we have done. So we're comparing these two histories of the King of the South. His first history and his alpha and his omega history. So we've compared them, and we're going to compare and contrast. So we've compared them, and we're going to learn from each one of these battles. Ipsus is going to teach us about 2016. And Heraclea is going to teach us about 2018. August 1940 is going to teach us of 2018. But 1940, I hope I said 1940, not 1840. August 1940 is going to teach us 2018. But we can't just take August 1940 as a waymark and drop it into our history. The reason why we can't do that is because this is the history of failure. You can see that with Panium, we cannot take this dynamic of the King of the South coming against the King of the North and the King of the South winning and drop that into Panium, because on this line you had the King of the South at Panium going against the King of the North. The King of the South wins, but we know it's not that way. The King of the North has to win. And why can't we do that? Because one is a success and one is a failure. And we know that Panium, the King of the North, wins, not the King of the South. So, go ahead.
On that point, this hasn't been made into a connection yet in our movement, but we have two histories of failure and one of success, and two histories of failures and one of success, and we have that with Moses and then Christ and then Millerites and then us, right? But if this King of the North has the same thing, in the true line of success, you have two failures, and then the last one is a success. I don't think I've ever seen anyone make that connection between.
Say that again.
For the line of success, for King of the North versus King of the South, you have to have two failures for the King of the North, and then a battle of success.
Are you referring to then like with World War I and then World War II? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. No. Asculum, Heraclea, those two battles have to be failures. And then the last one is a success for the King of the North.
Right.
It's the same pattern. Two failures and one success.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
On the line.
Yeah.
On the line. Oh, okay.
On one single line, you have that same pattern
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
for the King of the North.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking you were saying there's another line that you're talking about. So yes, there's two, King of the North, King of the North. Yeah, she said that before. King of the North, and then the King of the South wins. King of the South, King of the South, King of the North wins.
Did she connect that with two histories of failure and one of success? Because I don't think that's what she
history of failure. I'm thinking of the whole line, because that's the history of failure. You're talking about within that history of failure, what goes on within that history of failure. Is that correct?
No, within the history of success, the line of success.
Yeah, in the line of success, there are multiple battles.
Yeah.
You're talking about the battles within that line.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the history is here and the one line here.
The histories are within the line. I guess I'm not following what you're saying.
2 histories of failure, 1 of success for God's people. But then the actual line on the battles, 2 battles of failure, 1 of success. I'm just wondering if there's a connection between those 2 because I haven't heard her make any.
Wait, my mind wasn't there. Go say it again. Sorry, Sister Adriana. What?
Millerites had the Millerite history and then they had the 1888 history and both were
Yeah, yeah.
failures. And then ours is going to be the 1 of success. That's a long span of history.
Mhm.
But within the 1 line of success in our time for the King of the North, which is the false King of the North, right? You have them, it has to have the same pattern, 2 battles of failure and 1 of success. And that's how you know what I'm saying? Like it seems like the same pattern.
So you're saying God's people have, is that what you're saying?
No,
Is-
she's just saying that there's a similarity.
Yeah.
She's comparing and contrasting those lines. She's not making any real application. She's just comparing the 2 histories.
Because
so-
it just seems really,
But are you
similar.
looking at it from 1989? Is that that's what I'm trying to ask? Are you looking at it? in
yeah,
our
the
history?
line of
In
our,
our history, our line, our reform line, are you saying that there has to be 2 failures and then a success?
for the King of the North.
Oh, for the King of the North, okay.
I'm just saying between the 2 you know what I'm saying? Just you know.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. She's just talking about like comparing the history of the Millerites.
Because we're the true history of we're the true King of the North people, right? And the King of the North is the false. I just thought it was interesting that in those battles, the same pattern matches what our history matches.
But not the history of our dispensation, not the history of the movement. Well, I mean, it's part of that history, but she's looking way back in the Millerite history because Millerite is an alpha history, so it's not our history, but you're extending it back to the Millerite history.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I'm still a little not sure what you're trying to say, but that's my problem. I don't know. Anybody else have any questions or comments of what she's saying? Sometimes when somebody else comments it, we can all pick it up a little bit better, but I'm not. I guess Victoria is, but I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say anything. I just
She's just
looking at the
comparing.
pattern.
Well, you were asking if there's what about something has it ever been noticed, and that's what I'm not catching what you're talking about, because it says
The
that
pattern.
The pattern.
that's what all this is about. That's why I'm missing what you're saying, because that's what this is all about. It's showing the patterns.
So
It's
she
showing
does,
that there's 2 wins and
Yeah.
then a loss.
and she
then
connects
there's-
it back to the history of the Millerite history of the 2 histories of failure and 1 of success.
Now you're talking about God's people now.
Yeah,
I know,
the
that's the
whole time
point.
she was comparing God's King of the North to the false King of the North.
It's okay. I can probably write it down later, but I don't want to keep up the.
The Millerite history being 2 failures
Yeah,
and
there
a
was
win and a success at the end.
yeah, with us, the movement being a success.
Yeah. It's
I think I understand what you're saying. I think the reason I have a hard time with it is looking at the time frames of what this line here takes us to.
which one?
Um,
Oh, that one.
yeah, that you're looking at a bigger span than what each of these actually, because this constitutes the span of the reform line and this constitutes the span of World War II.
Mhm.
And so you're taking a whole big line,
Not from their history,
right?
from ours.
So, okay. But if nobody has any comments? So, let's see, and why can't we do that? Because 1 is a success and 1 is a failure, and we know at Panium, the King of the North wins, not the King of the South. So when we study 2018, which we will do, we need to remember this concept, lines of success and failure. When we study August 1940, it's still good. It's still going to teach us that there are some things that need to change. The King of the South is the initiator of this conflict in our line, we're to look for the conflict begun by the King of the North. And then at the end, instead of looking for a victory of the King of the North, we have to look for a victory of the King of the South. So we have to change these concepts. And that's how we are going to study the King of the South. But we need to take these lessons and not say that that's all and well and good, but rather learn from them, because there's people in the movement taking Millerite history, taking a waymark and just dropping them wholesale into our history. And if people are not aware of what they're doing and the rules they are breaking, it looks deceptively accurate. And I would suggest it's dangerous. We can't drop them from failure to success. We're going to discuss Millerite history another time. I think she's kind of alluding to what you're talking about.
No.
So it becomes a little bit more complicated to know where to approach this subject, because everything becomes connected. Any subject we pick is interconnected with one another. So we'll introduce this thought by considering another rule, and that is connecting our waymarks. If we were to go to Millerite history and we were to consider 1844, we would consider April 19th. We'd talk about July 21st, about August 1st, August 15th, and October 22nd, 1844. These are waymarks in Millerite history. And what did the Millerites need to do to accurately go through this history? To navigate it safely, they had to go through each waymark following the growth and development of an internal message. They had to walk in step with that message as it grew and developed. So there is an internal message inside the movement. Let's see. Yeah, so that they must walk in step with to go through safely. If we were to take that to our reform line, there's a difference. We come to April 19th, which is 2001. July 21st is 2014. August 1st is 2016. August 15th is 2018. And October 22nd is 2019. Even if you aren't entirely sure how we come to those years, I just want to state it now to make a point. In 2001, what must have you to successfully pass that waymark? There's an internal message developing in this time period, but that isn't enough. With Millerite history, it's internal growth of the message. But when you come to 2001, what did you need to see? It wasn't just an internal message. Now you need to see external events connected to that internal message. So you need to see 2001, we're going to have a message about the woes developed. There's going to be more of an increase of knowledge, but you needed to see an external event, 9/11, 2014, the Sunday Law. There's an internal message that we must walk in step with. There's external events that we also must connect to it. 2016, there's an internal message on the King of the South, but there is an external event in the United States, Trump's election, and we must connect the internal with the external. In 2018, we have a battle of Heraclea. It connects to our internal message in 2019. Our October 22, 1844 is connected to external events. So the Millerite history had internal events only that they had to walk in step with. And on our history, on our line, we have external events that are to match all along the way. So compared to Millerite history, our reform line has another layer, and that is these external events that we must connect to come to 2019 and accurately predict what it's going to look like. What we need to do to predict it is make sure that these external events are being accurately traced. You cannot accept 2014 if you haven't seen 2001. So what is required of you is to take these external events and connect them. They must tell a story, a development, and I'm going to explain what this looks like. So the Millerite history only had internal events. And our line has internal and external events, and they must line up and match. And the external is what's doing the work on the Levites and the Nethinims. We're coming to this history, 2016 and forward, and what people are saying, what they begin to understand, is that the king of the south is coming back into history, and there's going to be two battles, Raphia and Panium. So if everybody remembers that, I think it was around December 2016 when that first was opened up. People understand there's going to be two battles in our history, and this was Daniel 11, I want to say 11 to 15, but it might be 12 to 15. My memory wasn't sharp on that, but those two battles are in Daniel 11 verses 11 to 15 in there.
Yeah, 11.
So they're studying ancient battles and warfare, and they bring that into our history, and they expect a hot war. So they're looking at Raphia and Panium and seeing that they are what the warfare was, and they're bringing in that we're going to have a hot war, and they expect a hot war. People start buying up food. They move into the country if they're not already there, preparing to lose their jobs. We're planning for people being forced into the army. There's going to be this massive war between Russia and the USA, and they are expecting all of that to start at Raphia. They don't have a date yet, but they're expecting this event. I would suggest why we did that is because we did not connect our waymarks. So they were looking at Raphia and Panium without actually connecting the waymarks and understanding, and we're going to go into the mode of warfare. People did not watch the relationship develop between Putin and the West from his election in 1999. They did not connect those waymarks and see what was actually occurring. 2014 and 2016 gave us all we needed to know about what that war looked like. But people were not following the external events accurately. So they cut this rope and ignored what it looked like in this history and started expecting some type of nuclear strike.
Can I say something?
Uh-huh.
You know how we're learning about what prophecy is and how Parmenter is defining a prophet, and that there's 3 steps to it that, looking into Isaiah 46 verse 10, where it talks about we know the end from the beginning, basically, and where we get the whole parable of Alpha and Omega, and that a prophet is in 3 steps, basically. You have to be in the present, right? And you're looking from the beginning to know what is to happen in the future based on what is happening in the beginning, and you know that the end is going to look the same as the beginning. That is defining a true prophet. So, in those who cannot understand what Raphia looked like back then, right, or what Panium is going to look like coming forth, are they false prophets?
What was your question?
They did not understand, however you want to say it. They had the choice to, as more light opened up, to accept. I don't know.
I mean, and how you have groups talking about what Panium will look like.
They weren't following the rules.
Uh-huh.
Maybe they weren't following the rules when Jesus, we have learned that he declares the end from the beginning. To understand the end, you look at the beginning, you look at our reform line and trace our reform line. So if you go back to those battles and you see a hot war, you can't take a hot war from history and put it into our history and call it say it's going to be a hot war when our entire history says otherwise.
Right.
It'll be the same mode of warfare.
So
they are false prophets.
That would determine a false prophet. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, I mean, because we were back there at that time.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I didn't have any certainty that it would be a hot war, or I was still learning, so my mind was open.
Well, that's kind of what I mean, is because we were back there too, and I wasn't. Well, I went and carried out and taught it that we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's coming.
Okay.
that's how, if I remember right, that's how I would say it. And yeah, there's some that are saying it's a hot war, some that are saying it's nuclear this, and somebody, but we don't know what it's going to be. And then information wars start to come out. So I guess no, I have to think back, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I had any certainty. But some people, I guess what you're trying to say is people had certainty and went and taught it anyways. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're learning from future. I mean, that's what they're doing now. I'm actually not just back then, but that's what they're doing now.
Still, yeah.
Exactly, still.
A lot of the, and because there were little signs of fanaticism, I think, before the split, and they weren't because of how the group was, and you had Parminders teaching, bringing everyone back into, you know, correct application and stuff, and having rules. No one was really allowed to really go out the bounds, but when that split happens and they were allowed to go their own way, they just went full on, you know, into that. But then none of that, you're not using any of God's rules anymore. If you're not using God's rules, but you're making predictions about the future that are incorrect, that is a false prophecy.
Yes.
You know,
Which is what I've kind of come to see. It's like, I think I mentioned it maybe on Wednesday night, I don't remember, but it's like, when I really think about it, we were going nowhere.
yeah.
We're like taking a stab at this, a stab at that, a stab over here, a stab at this, and going nowhere and just waiting for it all to sort itself out. And God did sort it out. Again, He did sort it out. But yet we had the opportunity to accept His sorting it out, I guess is the way to say it. We had the opportunity to accept His sorting it out. But I really think about the danger we were all in, because it was really going nowhere. It was really going nowhere. And eventually it was going to head to destruction.
But what do you mean by going nowhere? And what are you talking about going nowhere?
You have to come inside my head and
some of the
some
of the applications kept taking us into walls where, you know, you couldn't, the lines, they wouldn't come. And the other thing is that it felt, for me, it frustrated me because I felt like the rules kept changing on how you apply things, and rules kept getting created of how you apply things. I'm like, where did these rules come from? Who's making all these rules? And made no logical sense. I was just talking to someone on here. It was literally when the Midnight Cry message came in, and it was logical step by step. It was like, God loves us.
Yeah.
Amen.
Exactly.
And that's,
Amen.
that's the, I think Brother Jonathan put in here that he sent us teachers to sort it out. But I think that's a good point, because what I thought about is that in our journey, you know, through this movement and how God has led us, you know, we did listen to all presentations, right? We were listening to Parminder, Elder Jeff, we were listening to just different people and the message, you know, presenting these, presenting. And so I know I spent most of my time listening to Elder Parminder. I didn't really listen to Jeff as much, but I listened to mostly Parminder's presentation. I don't know if that had an effect on where I am right now. I don't know, but I can honestly say that. But I was listening to everyone. You know, I was hearing different messages from, and whatever God was hoping to click in my mind, I was understanding, you know, and trying to go forward with it. But my point is that because when we go back to those streams of information, right? Those two streams of information, and it wasn't as fast to us what was happening as it was for those living in that, you know, whole circle of situations going on, and knowing the inside of what's, you know, why things are being taught as they were, you know, all the stuff that Elder Parminder is coming out with to us, you know, with. So with them knowing those things and him teaching, you know, what he was teaching and how he was teaching it, if you were listening to him, you were following in the way that he was trying to help you learn.
I believe listening to him was showing me how wrong I was in so many things, and I think about God's mercy and my ignorance, that he helped us to come along the way. For me, that's me. But then maybe it goes to also, we understood that this was the movement that God had raised up, and he gives specific light to specific people. And I really believe Elder Parminder was given a lot of specific light and a lot of guidance. But there's something he had to probably do his own self. I mean, there's something we have to do our own selves as well.
Amen.
We have to be prepared vessels
Amen.
for such a work as well. But then he's going to give it to his messenger. His messenger is going to give it. I too was listening to Elder Parmenter. Is probably more so. I came to where I was listening to him more than I was Jeff as well. I would always work out and get both the best I could. And I was listening to Parmenter as well, and I was recognizing how wrong I was. But I don't know how to express in my words that how I feel about how it really look back visual. We were really going nowhere. If you're God is looking down on his movement, and we're all over the place, right? We were all over the place.
It's the Watertown tent. It was literally like the other people were crazy that these were trying to learn, but the fact that these were here, you couldn't get done.
learn.
You couldn't do anything. It was like stopping everything from progressing forward. I was thinking about that Watertown tent this morning. I'm like, it's literally all of last year. It was like that Watertown tent was getting crazier and louder until
Watertown tent?
the
Exeter.
in Exeter. There were two tents. One was full of fanaticism. The other one, people were trying to learn, but they couldn't because of this tent was so rowdy until the message came in that cut all fanaticism out. And then it's like the clouds parted. But that is literally like a fulfillment of that. It's pretty crazy.
Sister Susan says, for me, it was Tess. I just knew she was extraordinary. And the message she gave in October 2018 was only possible through the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Same here.
Yep. Amen. She went up there because if you guys, most of us, I think, watched her the year before when she did Acts 27 at the level that she knew it at the time, and she also did about the Magi, right? She was almost as if she was, I don't want to say she was a different person, but you could see when she came in October 2018, she took command of the presentations. And you could see that. You could see a certainty. You could see it. It was visual to me anyways. So, okay, so
I just thought about how brave she had to be because she was going to go up there and teach this movement of all these leaders and teachers that are centered there and teach them something completely different than they ever heard before.
It makes
if
me
you know
think
it's
of
true, you go
Elijah.
do it.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Elijah, like the young, he wasn't an elder, but he was a young, I always admired him. When Job and his friends were going through it, they were trying to tell Job, you're cursed because of some sin. And Job was like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm this righteous person. I can't see why this is, happening to me. And then that young person, I think his name was Elijah. Eliab. No, what is his name?
Eliezer?
Eliezer. No.
Eliab, something like that.
No, it was something.
Eliam? No.
Anyways, I'll find it. But he spoke up to all of them and was like, no, this is, this and this. He was a young person. He wasn't even, an elder, but God used that young man to, Elihu, yes. Elihu, yeah. Used Elihu to tell them, and put them in the right place of thinking about these things. And then, God started coming in and talking to Job personally. But it was really interesting. Elihu, my point is, it just makes me think of Sister Tess. I don't know.
Okay, so what we need to do is connect our waymarks and go back to the time of the end, 1989 to 1991. We teach in this movement, everything that we need to know is encapsulated in this time period. That this increase of knowledge is everything that we expand on or add to as this internal message is developed. What we haven't done is take that concept to the external events. We take 1989 to 1991 and take it back to Millerite history, 1798 to 1818. So we would line these up. 1798 to 1989, 1818 to 1991. There's an increase of knowledge. And what is William Miller saying? In 1818, he says that in about 25 years, Christ is going to come back. And then all they do after 1818 is begin to share and add to that original message. But everything for that message is there in the beginning. He has done his study, now it just gets expanded. So 1989 to 1991, the study of Daniel 11:40 and everything that we're looking at in these presentations, the King of the South, is just in that one verse, because we are living in that verse and still walking through Daniel 11:40. And the internal message is encapsulated in that increase of knowledge. So this is a story of our increase of knowledge, our time at the end. When we come to external events and we want to know what these battles look like, what much of this looks like, we need to consider the external. And in 1989, a lot more happened than the fall of the Berlin Wall. So much happened in that year that the Time magazine, 20 years later, wrote a book about 1989, listing everything that happened in that year. They recognized that it was a turning point in history. The fall of the Berlin Wall was just a couple of pages in that book, because there is a lot more than we can trace back to connect 1989. If we're going to consider war between the King of the South and the King of the North, we want to know what that looks like. We need to take our thread back into these histories. We won't go through that in these studies, but it's worth looking at to consider the Cold War. Go back before 1989. Just one thing about the Cold War. Why was it a Cold War? They came up with the acronym MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. The point behind this phrase is to say that it would be mad for there to be a hot war between the King of the North and the King of the South. Because for the US to attack the USSR, or the USSR to attack the US, would be mutually assured destruction. If the USA attacks the USSR with a nuclear weapon, before that bomb hit, the USSR would release their own, and both countries would be decimated. So to strike your enemy was an act of suicide, and they called that MAD. And that this is the 46-year Cold War. And I was thinking about that when I was going through this last night. In my thought process, anyways, my naivety, my thought process is why would anybody want to have nuclear weapons then? But you do, it's a deterrent as opposed to a weapon, right? You guys probably already knew that long before I ever, because I was sitting there thinking, well, why is all this madness to have nuclear weapons if you're not going to use them? Why are you going to spend billions of dollars on nuclear weapons if you're never going to use them? But it's a deterrent.
Yeah. I mean, because if you don't have one, then the other countries,
Then they-
yeah.
So mutually assured destruction is a doctrine of military strategy and national security policy in which full-scale use of nuclear weapons by two or more opposing sides would cause the complete annihilation of both the attacker and the defender. And see preemptive nuclear strike and second strike. It's based on a theory of deterrence, which holds that the threat of using strong weapons against the enemy prevents the enemy's use of those same weapons. The strategy is a form of Nash equilibrium in which, once armed, neither side has any incentive to initiate a conflict or to disarm. So yeah, you guys are catching my naivety and my ignorance on these things. I never paid attention to war. I just was not, I was never good at that game Risk, the board game Risk.
I've never heard of that. I think that's before my time, but that's okay.
So coming to our time, in that dynamic, is that dynamic changed at all? No, we don't talk about it like we did in the Cold War, but that dynamic has not changed. So what they had to do is develop a new mode of warfare. We come to 1989 and to 1991, and now there is a new problem for the King of the South. After 1991, it goes from a communist economy to a Western-style capitalist economy. All of the government-owned infrastructure is sold at an extremely cheap rate, and it's snapped up by oligarchs. A handful of men fight over these cheap state-owned businesses They kill each other over them until just a few men hold the important infrastructures inside Russia. Their gas companies, the electricity, and all those institutions that used to be run by the state. They very quickly become billionaires. They become Russia's oligarchs. And these are some of the primary men who now do the bidding of Putin. They do his will. He works through his oligarchs more so than he would work through his government. These billionaires know that both their wealth and their life depend on keeping the president happy. But they weren't able to take up all that. They weren't able to take up all that money, and much of that money, as the businesses were sold off, hemorrhaged out of Russia into the West. And now a large part of the Russian money is invested in the West. A lot of it's in London, which explains a little bit about the politics between the two countries. There's a lot of it in the United States. And now the West has another way to control Russia. If Putin was to go to war with the West, it would be mutually assured destruction. But now it gets worse for Russia because it would be mutually assured economic destruction.
Can I say something real
Yeah.
quick? Sorry to cut you off, but I want to add to that because the Brexit deal right now, the UK wants to separate from the European Union, and Boris Johnson is claiming that he's going to have it completed by January 31st this month. England is financially, or the UK is financially already seeing its losses through the economy crisis, and this Brexit deal is going to make the UK more susceptible, where the common folk of the country is going to be more poor than it already is. It's already really bad. And the reason why I'm throwing this in there is because Russia has its money tied up in British banks. And I'm doing a sermon I have to leave like in half an hour from here and go to the Alberta group because I'm doing my sermon there. But I'm doing it on this topic of the European Union and Russia. I don't understand all the dynamics at this point, but he wants the UK to pull out of the European Union and be a separate entity. For some reason, it's going to promote him, and he's quite delighted about it. And so is Trump on that matter, because Trump just recently says, at first he says, I want to make deals and do trade with the UK. And then he says, no, we can't do deals and make trade with the UK because of Brexit. So he wants to do trade and deals with people that have money in their countries and not with England. So really England's going to crumble. And we're going to see that it's going to be a rippling effect through all the countries, not just Europe, but here, because America's the superpower. And that's what brings in the Sunday law eventually. I just wanted to throw that in because this is on topic to what you're talking about here.
Yeah, thank you. So having them all united, the European Union stands in the way of the United States and the power he wants to wield. Is that correct?
Yeah.
It is, and it also stands in the way of Russia too.
Okay, so their breaking apart is going to give strength and power to the United States, because let's kind of think back to the risk game. I was never good at it, but you had to have your power over all these different countries. But if you've got one block of countries all united together, then they're powerful together. But if you divide them apart, then you can control them a little bit better and take in and conquer, right?
Yeah, you take it. Well,
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. We all know that if the American economy is not doing well, the whole world suffers. But now if the American economy is not doing well after 1991, that the King of the South will also suffer. So now there's two incentives and two reasons. So for Putin to not engage the West in a hot war, and he needs to defeat his enemy without an open strike or damaging their economy, because either way he would damage himself. This requires a clever approach, and Putin is one of the smartest world leaders alive. He's been very clever through this history.
But Trump don't believe that.
Yeah, I know.
I think he's tangled up.
You can't believe that if he thinks he's the smartest person.
I mean, how do you do it?
Yeah, because that is definitely, he believes he's the smartest
If
person.
your money is in your neighbor's backyard, how do you fight with the neighbor? See, it's, here you can.
Yeah, yes. But they're each using their cleverness to try to take the other one out.
That's what he thinks. But this is the period when he
I don't-
thinks too much of himself.
Did anybody see that, the other, what's the name of the other book that's coming out? My mind is drawing a blank, but I'm gonna get that other book too that's coming out on Trump. Why? Maybe somebody else remembers it. There's enough of us here, somebody probably remembers it. Because there was a big article, we read it. Huh?
It's about Putin, isn't it?
No, the one about Trump, and it's
Brother Jonathan says a very stable genius.
yes, a very stable genius. Yeah, because I think a lot of us probably read that article that was in Time. Was it? I think it was in Time magazine or the Washington Post about that, and just detailing out going into the, what do you call it, the war room, where they went to the Pentagon and they went to that room, and so details of those discussions. And you got to think that the guy that anonymous, whoever he is, he had to have been in that room as well, because they're writing the same things. And but it's just amazing to in that article to see the things that Trump said and how they actually got together, got him in there to try to help him, because they understood, they could see that he did not understand how alliances work and why we need them and the importance of them. And they were trying to give him, and then when you read the book by Anonymous, you get another perspective of it, because he's talking about how they learned real quick that he didn't have an attention span to pay attention to anything. And so they started to try and not give bulletins and big long briefings to him, but to make just some PowerPoint visual to try to help him. But the PowerPoint, more than 2 pages, lost his attention, and he would get distracted with anything they say and go off on his own tangent and his own thing that he wants. So
Did you put that article in the chat, the WhatsApp chat, or?
I think I put it in WhatsApp, also on Facebook. I don't remember what it was called. It was talking about crybabies, if somebody remembers that.
I think
The crybabies one.
Calling all his generals dopes and whatever.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. If somebody wants to post that in this chat, that would be great.
I'll grab it.
In 1989, something new is developed, and this is known as the Internet's Big Bang, the World Wide Web. Prior to the World Wide Web's invention, the Internet was not so useful. You could not put out or access the information. It was not such a useful tool for either accessing or disseminating information. But in 1989, a man named Tim Berners-Lee fixes this problem. He writes a paper titled Information Management, a proposal. It's all about how to put out and access information on the internet. And this is one of the things that Time magazine highlighted. They called it the Internet's Big Bang. In this Time magazine article, if I remember right, it said it was written 20 years later. In 1990, he created the first web browser. So what went from being just a written paper in 1989 developed in 1990, and then the first web browser was released in 1991. So you have information management, he writes the article, and then the web browser is released 1991. So these 3 years are not just our increase of knowledge and not just the fall of the Soviet Union. They have another layer or story. And what they are doing is developing the internet into being this information platform where you can put out vast quantities of information and also access it. So there's Tim Berners-Lee, a little bit younger. I think it said this was 1990s somewhere. I can't remember what date it said. Berners-Lee, who never directly profited off his invention, has also spent most of his life trying to guard it. While Silicon Valley started rideshare apps and social media networks without profoundly considering the consequences, Berners-Lee has spent the past 3 decades thinking about little else. From the beginning, in fact, Berners-Lee understood how the epic power of the web would radically transform governments, businesses, societies. He also envisioned his invention could, in the wrong hands, become a destroyer of worlds, as Robert Oppenheimer once infamously observed of his own creation. His prophecy came to life most recently when revelations emerged that Russian hackers interfered with the 2016 presidential election, or when Facebook admitted it exposed data on more than 80 million users to a political research firm, Cambridge Analytica, which worked for Donald Trump's campaign. This episode was the latest in an increasingly chilling narrative. In 2012, Facebook conducted secret psychological experiments on nearly 700,000 users. Both Google and Amazon have filed patent applications for devices designed to listen for mood shifts and emotions in the human voice. So where did Google and Amazon, where do they hear the human voice? Through our phones?
Remember when you go to Google search and there's a microphone
Yeah.
and you decide to talk in your search instead of.
Oh, yeah. So they can get, so that's how they get the voice, but otherwise they get what we talk.
Cortana, where you click on Cortana and you speak to her what you want.
Yeah. Okay. So whether you type in a search or you speak in a search, speaking in the search is probably worse because then they
Voice
get your,
recorder apps through Google Play.
so then they get your tone of voice and they get develop things out of that. Okay. Well, the only thing they have me voice talking is transcribing notes.
I do a lot of voice searches.
Yeah.
They can find out my emotions. I don't care. I don't know what they're gonna do with that information.
Yeah.
Never know.
Do they hear when we talk to ourselves?
Uh-oh.
Like when we were in our
We know
Do
they
they do
do.
that?
We know they have technology to do that because anytime you go anyplace and you got your smartphone on you, your smartphone is going to pop up with ads directly related to where you're at.
Oh, yeah. That's embarrassing.
Then it's going to make suggestions to you based on where you're at and what you're doing, conversations you've had. So, yeah.
Okay.
During the Cold War, we talked about sanctions and subterfuge. And now there is a new platform to engage in the activity, in an activity, particularly in undermining your enemy. It doesn't take Russia long. In 1996, Russia hacks the USA and goes into their Navy, into a computer system of their defense networks. So 1996, the formalization of our message, Russia is already beginning to act. They hacked the USA. It's known as Moonlight Maze, the name given for that operation. In early March 1998, word came through that someone had hacked into the computers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and was pilfering files, unclassified but sensitive, on cockpit designs and microchip schematics. Over the next few months, the hacker fanned out to other military facilities. No one knew his location. The hopping from one site to another was prodigious, swift, and global. His searches bore no clear pattern, except that they involve high-profile military research. Is that research, R&D?
Research and development.
What?
Probably
Research and development projects. 9 months earlier, when cyber war was still a hypothetical matter, the Pentagon had staged a war game called Eligible Receiver, in which 25 members of an NSA red team, using commercially available gear, hacked into every Defense Department computer network, shutting down or distorting vital communications. Now, in an operation an interagency task force dubbed Moonlight Maze, the Pentagon was experiencing the real thing from foreign power. I don't know, because she's marking it at 1996. This particular article had it at, and this was Politico, has it at 1998. So I don't know if anybody has any information on that. And there's a link attached to these things. This came off of the same website. So there's a link there that you can look it up. So I don't know if anybody has any comment on that, because I know she's marking it at 1996, the formalization of the message. And maybe this particular article was wrong. But when I was reading through these last night as well, I was thinking about
Started in 1996.
started in 1996.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about if anybody remembers the movie War Games. Did you guys all?
The hacking started in 1996, and it affected the NSA, but the investigation that started, that was called Moonlight Maze, was in 1998.
1998. Okay.
But
So
the hacking was starting, this whole thing was starting in 1996.
okay. And it says in here 9 months earlier that they did a hypothetical. Did anybody watch the movie War Games back when that came out? I would have never thought about it at the time. Did anybody remember that movie, War Games, Matthew Broderick?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't it similar theme to what's going on in Hawaii, where Edward Snowden had worked at prior to spilling the beans and being a whistleblower? But it had that same underground theme where they have this huge monitor screens and they're looking at all the different countries that are the enemies and the allies. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah, and
Right.
it was a kid that got into the system, and he thought he was playing a game, right? I think initially he thought he was playing a game.
What was it called?
But it was
He was in there playing. Actually, I don't think he knew until they took him in, until they came and got him. They were hunting him down because he just thought he was playing a game online. And he had actually got into their system and he was playing this game, and he had triggered to be a war that was going to happen. And so they all thought it was real, and it was just a game, if I remember right. It's been a long time, but anyways, it's interesting that, Hollywood is always right on top of all these things happening. So in 1990,
Wasn't that after Edward?
no,
or before?
War Games was a long time ago. Edward Snowden was just the last 2012.
2013.
War
Yeah,
Games was
2012.
back in the
Okay, fair enough.
War Games was back in the 90s at least.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
1996, another big bang. You have the release of Google and various news services, Yahoo, Fox News. Newspapers begin to go online, the New York Times and the Washington Post, such as the Washington Post. I want to mention one other one, and that was Krypton. We're not so familiar with Krypton. You might be familiar with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. This was the predecessor to WikiLeaks, the website that was set up to release information on the government. So you have all types of news being set up in 1996. And as a movement, we need to be much more aware of Fox News, what they were set up for in 1996. Because in Fox News, we have a new platform speaking for conservative Protestant America. And they lead and are crucial to the election of Donald Trump, and also crucial what he is doing to in the future. And then we have Google, and now we have search engines. Then we have Krypton releasing government secrets, and we have Russia waking up to the fact that they can hack the USA and gain information. This is a quick overview of a study that was done last year. We can see it more in detail in October 2018 at the School of Prophets when it was first presented. When we go back to this time period, it doesn't just give us the information for our internal message, it also gives us external events. And what we see being developed is a new mode of warfare, a new weapon. Even secular sources recognize this event. So you have 1989, you have an increase of knowledge, and this increase of knowledge is, you got the web being developed and the first web browser, then you have the first hacking, and you also have now the two streams of information developing, and they're all going to be using this technology. So here is also a link. I had this in the previous with the Brazil classes as well, that can take you to read up on that, the WikiLeaks spy files in Krypton. Donald Trump said something interesting around September last year. We're going to discuss why he said this, but he said the rise of the internet corresponded with the rise of the USA as the world's only superpower. What is Trump saying? He's comparing and contrasting, and he's saying that at the same time that the internet rose up, is the same time that the USA was rising up as the world's only superpower. And the key word is only. When was the US rising up as the world's only superpower? From 1989 to 1991. Because what was happening in 1989 to 91? Prior to 1989, how many world superpowers do you have? You have two. So 1989, you had Soviet Union and the USA. So 1989 is the fall of the King of the South, the Soviet Union. And if the other superpower is falling, you can be sure the USA is rising up as the world's only superpower. And he says that this time period, he takes that concept and compares and contrasts, and he says at the same time this is happening is the rise of the internet. So there you have Donald Trump back in 1989 also pointing out I can't remember when she said he said this. Maybe somebody else can. I actually meant to look that one up, but I think I was working on it during the Bible study last night to try to finish the details, because I remember having that information in the Brazil class slides. But that he's making the connection between 1989 and the internet and coming to being only one world superpower. So Donald Trump recognizes that connection. And it's this thread, the information and increase of knowledge, that we need to bring down into our history and use to understand how battles are fought in our time, because we're already being told that in the increase of knowledge and understanding the concept of mad, we can understand why there cannot be a hot war, that would be suicide. So the point we need to see is when we are going through our studies, we need to recognize the role of the internet. We also need to see that we cannot disconnect our thread. We can't see an external battle in the future and disconnect that event from the history that leads to that event. So when we come to Raffia, it's already being explained to us in the history of 1989 to 91. There was another reason to start considering this subject, because we began to consider in 2018 when we understood that 2016 is the Battle of Ipsus. And what won the Battle of Ipsus for the Allies? And that was the elephants. And then Heraclea and Asculum and Beneventum, elephants won the battle. So what mode of warfare that was used in 2016 is the mode of warfare that is going to be used at Raffia. And then we also saw that not only can you place elephants here, it's the beginning of World War II, and the invasion of Poland looks a lot like the invasion of the Soviet Union. So we now have two witnesses to say that Raffia looks like 2016, or Ipsus, in the method of warfare. And since that time, we have also been able to see 2018 develop, which makes that argument stronger still. So we must connect our waymarks. Before we get into the subject of 2016, we need to consider one other topic, and that is 2014. We're saying 2014 is Sunday law for the priests. And there was a little bit of difficulty in the movement to identify what that looked like, what that Sunday law was in 2014. There are ideas that were thrown around. The way that we need to understand the Sunday law is 2014 is by going into our reform line from the perspective of a parable. And that is that 2014 is going to be understood by compare and contrast. The first point we're going to compare and contrast. Second point, we're going to connect our waymarks and say that whatever happened in 2014 can be traced back and pinned to the time of the end. Two rules that we need to follow. So we're going to compare and contrast, and then we're going to connect our waymarks. So before we go into the study of 2016 and the Battle of Ipsus, we'll take a moment and consider 2014. And what was 2014 in Pyrrhus in World War II? What happened here? We understood that there was an alliance between the King of the South and the King of the North. To explain this, we'll go back to the time of the end and discuss a business that was set up. In 1989, this isn't in England, it's in Britain. We're going to explain why it needed to be Britain. There is a man named Nigel Oakes, and he sets up a business. It begins just as research. He plans on doing research on human behavior, and his plan is with this study of human behavior to know how to manipulate and control it, and then make money off that research. And as he is doing this study, he has a new tool he can use, and that is the internet. So this study of human behavior becomes much more detailed than it has ever been before. He sets up BDI, the Behavioral Dynamics Working Group. I should have changed that. Supposed to say BDWG, working group. It's an institute run in Britain that studies social influence. It describes itself as the world's leading center for research and development into persuasion and social influence. It's said to be the only academic organization in the world whose understanding of this psychology and persuasion has been successfully used globally. So if I'm following correctly then too, like when we talked, somebody brought up Snowden. We talked about him before, and Snowden, in his book, which I gave to my son because I wasn't being able to read all these books, but what little bit I did read of that book so far, his mom can be traced back to directly to the Mayflower, and that his family, the men in his family, all were in the military and all fought in battles. And I think somebody pointed out it might have been the American Revolution, whatever was 100 years or so before abolition, that war, and I'm not good on my history, that his family came back from that, the men came back from that war, and that they had, at that time, 100 years before abolition, that they had released all their slaves. So it's interesting to see.
The revolution of fighting the UK for American independence.
Say that again?
And the war for American independence against the UK, Britain.
Would that be 100 years before?
Yeah, it was 1780s.
Okay.
In 1781 that they won.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys are better, thank you. Better up on some of the details than I am. But before the abolitionists came along, they had set their slaves free. It shows a lot about the mentality and the ancestry and the seeds and such that are produced along the way. And we know that within a family, you could have seeds go multiple directions. But how sin and different aspects of sin can be generational unto the fourth generation until God deals with it. So, anyways, you see that in Snowden, but you also see that it seems to be in Tim Berners-Lee, that he understood the potential of it, and he's fought to try to protect it from being what it is.
I missed it on Tim Berners-Lee.
It was in a previous slide.
I know.
Go back later. You have it in your notes here.
Even the internet.
Oh no, it's probably not in those notes. It's probably not in those notes. It's only in the slide. Okay, so you got Nigel Oakes. He's speaking to a magazine and describing this business he's setting up. He says we use the same techniques as Aristotle and Hitler. We appeal to people on an emotional level to get them to agree on a functional level. It's interesting that he is saying the same techniques that Hitler used because we traced our history, Rafi and Panium, but first of all, Ipsos, and it lined up with World War II. And who is Hitler?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. The same techniques that Hitler used to rise to power, the same techniques that Trump is going to use. And the man that created this technique, now using the internet freely, admitted that in 1992. And the research done in 1989 is what is developed through this history and then used in Trump's campaign. Same techniques used to elect Trump were used to elect Hitler.
So the baby of the Cambridge Analytica is that behavior dynamics working group?
I don't know if you would call it the baby, you would call it the mother,
Oh, okay.
right?
Would be
If you're gonna use that terminology.
Yeah.
The grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you
Well,
got-
I
Because you
know,
had
because it
SEL in
came
the middle.
first. Well, because that is before.
DWD came first, then STL, then Cambridge.
Then Cambridge
Yeah.
Analytica.
Well, that's what I meant, but I was thinking the opposite way, maturing instead of, the opposite.
So the head of the company that founded Cambridge Analytica said last year that President Donald Trump uses the same propaganda methods as Adolf Hitler did 80 years ago. Nigel Oakes is the CEO of SCL Group, which is the parent company of Cambridge Analytica. That's what you meant. Parent.
Yeah.
The data mining company that used information it gleaned about Facebook users to try to help Trump during the 2016 elections. Last year, Oakes was interviewed by a University of Essex professor and propaganda, and its role is in swaying public opinion during the Brexit referendum. The transcripts of the interview were posted by a committee in the British Parliament, and there you can click on those links if you have the slideshow accessible. And then I also put a link to a video that was an interview with, I don't know if it's the same interview or not. I was listening to part of it last night with Nigel Oakes. But Nigel Oakes himself said that describing the business he is setting up, he says, we used the same techniques as Aristotle and Hitler. And these are the same techniques then that Donald Trump is using, that was used for Donald Trump. And they freely admit that to these techniques, they need to use mass public persuasion and deception. So think about it, you're a voter and you want to know what's on the agenda, and they're freely admitting that they use mass public persuasion and deception to get you emotionally to act on a functional level.
Yeah, I know. That's why when people say that, you know, I don't know who said it, but they said that Trump, the people wanted Trump or something like that. Well, many people were manipulated into wanting Trump. I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people were. Not, I mean, and he didn't even win the populist vote. He won the electoral college vote. So it's not that the people wanted Trump. It was
Persuasion.
Yeah, the persuasion. Through persuasion that got Trump in the office. So, I mean, we can't put all the blame on people saying, well, this is the president you wanted, when they were manipulated into choosing him. I mean, and then when people get mad at those who don't want to vote, this is the very reason why many people don't vote, is because they think their vote doesn't count. And when you're manipulating minds on who you want to be in office, and it's only validating people's belief not to want that their vote doesn't count.
So what is he used for?
Everybody was manipulated. So there were still people that were on the other
That's
side.
what I'm saying. I'm not saying that everybody was manipulated, but some people, a lot of people were, and so
They were even manipulating people not to vote.
Well, I mean, either way, for people to come hard on people to vote and to get hard on people about not voting, when they see all this stuff happening and people being manipulated on who to put in office, it really does validate people's choice in not voting at all.
Here's about it, yeah. Like, is it my choice or did I get manipulated into this somehow?
Exactly, and some people, it's like, forget it, we already know that they're going to put in who they want anyway, so why does it even matter?
After watching that Frontline video, you see the techniques he uses now to have full support, loyalty, and how he will ruin a senator or a congressman in their state if they don't support him.
So people's
Because he goes and he
reputation is on
uses
the
his
line.
rallies to go in there and, because that's what he did with Fluke, right? Yeah, and that's what he did with Fluke. Fluke was his name, right? You brought him up earlier. That's what he used with him when he went to Arizona and went in there and mocked him and ridiculed him and belittled the guy until nobody wanted him anymore.
And see, on that's really messed up. But on the fact that people don't want to side on something because they're being so ridiculed, I mean, I don't know if it's because people don't know what to believe, or if people are just so stupid to want to agree with somebody who's putting someone down like that. But I can't see the comments in the chat, so if anybody is, I'm not able to.
You can use this if you want.
Okay.
Do you want to plug something in?
Oh, I can use my phone, but I'm just.
We can charge something for you if you want.
Well, I was just letting that.
Okay. So, and they freely admit to the use of these techniques, and they need to use mass public persuasion and deception. As one of the leading members once said, nothing has to be true. You just need the people to believe it. And that's the mentality that is being fed to Trump in 2016. Doesn't need to be true. All that matters is people believe it. It doesn't matter if Obama is born in Africa. What matters is the people believe it. It doesn't matter whether or not it's true that Hillary is a pedophile, as long as the people believe it. And I'm not really sure how anyone believes that Donald Trump says the truth. I'm not sure that even his supporters even believe what he says, but most of us are aware that he has the problem with the truth and has a problem with the truth. And these are the same techniques that Hitler used to deceive the public, to manipulate the public. It doesn't have to be true. But what it has to do is create an emotional response. That emotional response is nearly always fear.
It makes me think of that paper. I put it in the chat the other day when I was at work, and I saw this paper on self-discipline, and I thought it was just so interesting how and quite profound. That does take a lot of discipline in not doing that. That if it's not true, no, what is it? If hold on, how did it go? It said, if it's not, I know if it's not true, then don't say it. And if it's not right, don't do it. And the first one was, if it's not something, I can't remember. Let me try to find it. But I think it's really, that was really profound. Hold on. And I think
You can
if
do a
Donald,
word search in there.
I know. I didn't know I can do a word search in here.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that.
Sister Kathy Brown told me that.
How does she do that?
I think I know where the 3 dots are. You can search.
Where do you search? Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut into
Yeah.
here.
So be afraid of Muslims, be afraid of immigrants, be afraid of anyone who does not fit into your definition of the Judeo-Christian West. This phrase applies specifically Judeo-Christian West because in this history, another person becomes involved. Steve Bannon.
Oh, I found it. If it's not yours, don't take it. If it's not true, don't say it. If it's not right, don't do it. And I was thinking, well, if someone put that paper in front of Donald Trump, what would he think? What would his response be?
Was talking about me.
His response would be roll.
This is the one that just had a guy executed because the guy said bad things about us.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think it would sting him though. If it's not true, don't say it, because he says a lot of things. But I don't know. It probably wouldn't.
So now we have this other person, Steve Bannon. We need to look into this man and understand him, search out his mentality and what he says and what he has been involved in. This work began in 1989 with the Behavior Dynamics Working Group. It is then developed by Nigel Oakes, then connect with Steve Bannon. And he is responsible for 2 recent events that have changed the world as we know it. Both of the events are the work of this company: the election of Donald Trump and Brexit in the UK, the division of the European Union. And Steve Bannon said these are the 2 areas he is fighting, what he's fought for: breaking up the European Union, beginning in London, and Donald Trump's election. So Steve Bannon, he was the CEO, wasn't he, at some point then, Adriana?
The CEO of what?
Cambridge Analytica? Wasn't he a part of it?
Yeah, he was partners with Alexander Nixon.
Okay.
But I think Alexander Nixon was the CEO.
Next. Huh?
Next.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was
the CEO.
they were partners.
Yeah.
Because they needed, I think they needed money, I don't remember, but they invested a ton of money. It was Steve Bannon and there was another person. Oh,
That
Christopher
Facebook
Wiley.
guy?
Christopher Wiley?
no, Steve Bannon and, that really rich right-wing guy in the politics.
The Mercers?
Yes, Rob Mercer. So those two at the same time, Steve Bannon and him went to get involved with Cambridge.
So we're discussing 2014. We want to understand what's happening in 2014, and we understand whatever it is, it's violation of the Constitution and the people's rights under the Constitution. And if we take 2014, we understand that it is this, that there is this pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in World War II, and it's an alliance between Pyrrhus and Demetrius in the history of Pyrrhus. What are we saying about 2014? Who is the king of the North? In the history of World War II, who is the king of the North? Germany was the king of the North in that history, and the king is Hitler. So they are identifying Hitler, the king of the North, in the history of Donald Trump, even before he is elected. No one knows that in 2014, Donald Trump is going to run for president, although you can begin to be aware of that from 2011. So you see this alliance, 2014, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and this alliance between Pyrrhus and Demetrius. And then this alliance was then going to be used in the Battle of Ipsus. What we've done is connect our waymarks. We have gone from 1989, and we're starting to look at how we're going to apply this history, what World War III will look like in our history. And when we have completed our study of 2014, and we will consider those two battles, 2016 and 2018. So we have connected our waymarks, and now we will look and compare and contrast. What we are going to compare and contrast is the internal with the external, or two threads, internal and external, what's happening inside the movement and what's happening outside the movement. So inside the movement in 2012 is a waymark, and why? The message of time setting was first developed in 2012 and first presented to the movement here. And where was that message developed? In Britain, in the UK. So a message of time comes out of the UK and enters into the US in 2012. And if there's anybody joining that doesn't know what that message was, it was Elder Parmenter understanding the 126 coming to 2014 and believing that there would be a Sunday law in 2014, which was then presented and then rejected by the movement. So that was 2012. We discussed the Behavior Dynamics Working Group. In 1993, they formed a new company, SCL. This was the furthest development as a company, and it stands for Strategic Communication Laboratory. So it's a laboratory, like a science laboratory, where you study human behavior and how to manipulate it, and a laboratory is the internet. Taking people's behavior from the internet, primarily personal data, and then using that to create a profile of who that person is on a deeper level, what has ever been able to be done before. Because beginning in 1989, people began to put out personal info on the internet, and that has developed. Now there is thousands of pieces of personal data on the internet. They can be small pieces of data or information that they can create a picture or a profile of what that person is like.
Can I say something
Uh-huh.
about that?
Of their fears and hope.
Sorry,
Okay.
you can continue. I lost my thought came and went.
Oh, that was quick.
I know. Kind of. But I was thinking about how well, it had to do something about people putting their personal info on the internet, and just that people are making a profit off of people's data.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting that people can be so comfortable in putting themselves out there. I don't know if it's because, it's an outlet for people to express themselves in a way that they couldn't do it in real life. I mean, in person or whatever, or they just, it's a way of being creative or whatever, but
you don't have to do that. If you only use your passport once at the border, all your information goes on the internet.
yeah, but I mean, people just really do throughout their day-to-day life.
I like to say
doing
something too.
Oh, like breakups, relationships.
Yeah,
like
just
losing,
everything.
Oh, yeah.
Everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Everything. They just put it out there.
And the
You
other
know?
thing is all these mimes that get various mimes, if that's the right, I mean, that there's probably more that goes underneath that category. What about when you're on Facebook and these little surveys come up, these little cute little,
That's what I was gonna say.
there's a lot of people that play those little things.
Yep.
They're
Because they
all,
ask you all kinds of questions, you know, and they try to find out who you are and what your personality is. And
and it's funny because you see people like I have those in my family that just play on every one of them. It's like, I never touch one of them. For one, I never have time. It's like, I wouldn't do it anyways, but it's like, I don't have time for foolishness.
Yeah, but anyway, but the other thing to it is just that for those who are collecting that information, I don't know if they're like just overly curious and just want to know about people's lives or for blackmailing or
No, it's to
whatever.
learn how to manipulate them.
Exactly. You know, it's just really crazy. I mean, that's like, what do you call it, mad scientists, you know, or like, you know, just crazy. There's a word for it that I'm just trying. It's like criminal, almost criminal-like, you know, just like really scary that somebody wants to know everything about you
Because
so
you
they can
think about it, what is the purpose of doing it?
You said
To
like
sell
manipulate,
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah, to manipulate, but why do you want to manipulate people? Why do
Exactly.
you want to have the skill to manipulate people?
To get what you want.
To
right?
get what you want. And I did listen to parts of that interview last night, and you know, definitely money comes up. Because there's a lot of money to be made in learning this. Because then he can sell his ability and sell his skill, and you know, and be hired out like they were hired out for these elections.
Yeah, it's just
money.
really interesting.
It's money.
Yeah, it's crazy though.
To play with people's minds,
Exactly.
unbeknownst to them, for money.
That's crazy.
So, and if Adolf Hitler would have had this tool, he would have been even more effective because it gives you much more than you're now able to manipulate, and he could do now with that. He could do with that scientific level. So in 1993, it forms the Strategic Communications Laboratory. They harness their skills in war zones, practice their skills. They develop their techniques in war zones like Iraq and Afghanistan through this history. And then they begin to realize that the same techniques they are using in war zones to persuade people to not join militant groups, they can use in electronics to persuade people to vote or feel a certain way. And they become, and you know, they do it with music, they do it with movies, they do it with so many different things. And they became involved in elections, primarily in third world countries. The reason that they are not so involved in the West is because that is their greatest threat to what they do is transparency. The reason that they are not so involved in the West is because that their greatest threat to what they do is transparency. They cannot work somewhere to their full effect if there is a free and open media. It makes it much harder to manipulate people if there's free media. And that's one of the reasons it takes them so long to enter the US market. So in 2012, something happens in the USA. What happened? This is the reflection of Obama. Obama served one term. He comes to 2012, he's fighting Mitt Romney, and Obama wins. He's a Democrat and defeats the Republican Mitt Romney. The Republican Party has now lost 2 elections, and they are extremely unhappy with the changes that Obama is making in the country. Obama is bringing in such changes. In 2011, he brings in gay marriage, and the Republican Party's base is particularly conservative Protestant America. So they're very unhappy with the changes Obama is making because some of them are quite significant. And in 2012, he's reelected. And the Republican Party is shaken and extremely unhappy. They want to find a tool that will ensure that they do not lose the following election in 2016. And SCL themselves said that this was the catalyst to enter into the American market. Now there is a political party that is willing to employ them. So in 2012, SCL enters the US market. They're coming from the UK into the US, and all of this to do work building up to 2016. Why did they connect in this history who do they connect in this history is Steve Bannon and some major Republican donors
It
they
really,
connect with.
sorry, it really seems that a lot of people from outside of America really worked in getting Trump into office. I mean, not just Russia, but I mean, it's like you have people from the UK, you know, and all of these different other countries that have been a part of, you know, or been a catalyst into Trump getting into office. You know, it's really crazy. And America, you know, I don't know, because you do have the conservatives and the evangelicals, but we have more minorities. Our country is so diverse, and it's been talked about that minorities, what do you call it, kind of override those who once used to be the minority were actually not being the minority anymore because there were more of us, or more differences in America, or diversity in America.
The minority is the majority.
Exactly, thank you. The minority started becoming the majority, so it was changing things in America. And so for that to have its influence, I think they really had to kick in gear to change, to kind of interrupt that.
Yeah, they were influencing with the Cambridge Analytica was putting messages out targeting African American people to make them not want to vote and suppressing other minorities. It's so messed
Because they would
up.
generally vote Democrat, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And now you have this other nonsense with the voter ID. It's just so much garbage.
So in 2012, on the internal, you have a message of time that comes from the UK and comes into the US. And we know that to be elder parliamentary. You also have the re-election of Obama and gay marriage, which actually probably could be down here on the external. The external, you also have the SCL coming in from the UK. So they both come from the UK. They both come in 2012. And they both come into the US and play a role. And so connecting our threads. So Alexander Nix was the public face of SCL, the CEO of the company. He said that in 2012, there was a vacuum with the Republican Party that created a commercial opportunity for SCL to begin to work with that political party. In 2013, he meets two people, Christopher Wiley, and it's through his testimony that this history was uncovered, through Christopher Wiley's testimony. He is a young man, but incredibly brilliant, gifted with code and computers. He did much of the work for them in this history. And these men, Christopher Wiley, Alexander Nix, and Steve Bannon, they see there's an opportunity here. So there's a link there if you want to read up on Cambridge Analytica. One of them is a link that takes you to Christopher Wiley, who is the whistleblower. I think some of us remember that some of those when he came out in the news. And then and also this one is 2016, but I added it in here just because we will be heading to 2016. But what is the name of their summit in 2016? And what is 2016 on the line? Concord. 2014 was Ipsos, right? 2016 was, or 2016 was Ipsos, yes. But it was also Concord. 2014 was Boston, Concord, yeah, and yeah. So it was Concord in 2016 as well. In a presentation at the 2016 Concordia Annual Summit in New York, Mr. Alexander Nix discusses the power of big data in global elections. Cambridge Analytica's revolutionary approach to audience targeting, data modeling, and psychographic profiling has made them a leader in behavioral micro-targeting for election processes around the world. You know, when this was all first coming out, just thinking about, there are some people that are enraged, but some of those people that you were talking about that just, they have more reason not to vote, they don't understand what is actually happening. You know what I'm saying? And they just get the, so what? How does that involve me? I don't care. And not knowing that they were actually affected by it.
Manipulated by it.
Huh?
And then manipulated by it.
Yeah. So all of these things are external events that are meant to be the plowing for the Nephilims is 2014 to, because they're in their former reign, right? So the plowing for the Nephilim. So this is all plowing the world. What is taking place in these years from 2014 to 2019. Steve Bannon says that the U.S. is in a transition phase. It's changing. He says that this is the 4th time this has happened in history. The first time was the American Revolution. The second time was the Civil War. And the third time, World War II. The 4th time is our history, the present. This is according to Steve Bannon. The American Revolution, the Civil War, World War II, and the Great Depression, and then present day. Steve Bannon is a far right-leaning conservative Protestant American. He sees Obama as dangerous and that America is losing control of its heritage, which he says is Christian. What he sees is in this company is something of a tool or a weapon he can use to try to manipulate the next election. We'll finish that story in our next study. I think that was it. Oh, one more. Last week we began to understand we're facing battles, 4 in our history, and they began in 2016. And what we want to understand is what it looks like. So we're using 2 rules, compare and contrast, and connect our waymarks. We already do that with the internal message. Everything is built on what has gone before, and in a special way is built on an increase of knowledge, just like it was in the Millerite history. So we need to go back to the time of the end to see what this war is going to look like, and then follow it at each stage of development. We've done that on 2 levels and saw the rise of the internet, and connected with that the rise of this particular company that is designed to use the same techniques as Hitler to use the information and manipulate the public opinion. And all of this you can pin in 1989, develop into battles we see in our history. So what began in 1989 is the building of this tool that is now the tool used in these battles. And it's information war. And the internet gave it the platform. The internet, it says, was the laboratory for it.
Sister Susan asks, so can someone explain in simple terms how Cambridge Analytica is a Sunday law? I get it, but I also still struggle to understand it better. Or is at Sunday law? I think she meant at instead of a, but is at Sunday law.
At 2014, it maybe we're all finding our weakness because I don't hear anybody speaking up. But
That's when they came here.
Yeah, that is when they came here in 2014. But what they're looking to do is the Republican Party is going to use it. And what is the Republican Party trying to do? Or what are they doing? They're uniting church and state. So it's a big tool towards their union of church and
Yes.
state.
Thank you. That always, yes. So that's, yes, that was Cambridge Analytica. It was a big tool in combining church and state. Sunday law, a type of Sunday law.
How do we mark the church's involvement in that?
Because Steve Bannon and the Dominion, Dominant, how do I say it? The Project Blitz and the
Jonathan, did you mean the church, like the Seventh-day Adventist church?
Well, no, just because we're saying that it's church and state. I was just wondering how the.
Yeah, because this is the far-right Christian that Steve Bannon, far-right Christian, using this tool to get the Republican Party into place, that the Republicans would lose the election. And that's using church to unite state.
I don't see how the church is involved. Steve Bannon is state and the Republican Party is state.
You say that again? These guys are talking in the background. I apologize.
I don't see the church's involvement in that because Steve Bannon is a member of the state and the Republican Party is the member of the state. So I don't see the church in all that.
Steve Bannon is a Catholic who's fighting for Judeo-Christian ideals.
But he doesn't represent the church. He represents the state.
According to who?
Well, he's a politician. He's not evangelical.
What do you mean? He's fighting for the religious rights. That's the whole thing he's fighting for.
Trump is a politician.
Yeah.
I understand that they are all, so is Trump, but Trump still represents the state. So it's some part of that agreement. There has to be. He's not, like, I understand he's a Christian, but he's not representing the church. He's representing the state in that agreement.
No, he's representing the church.
He's representing the church and the union of church and state. He's bringing.
What I'm saying is he's not a church leader. He's not one of the church leaders. So if you have the church leaders standing on one side,
that's actually part of the story, because Parmenter wasn't a leader at the time either, if I recall. That it did not come from the church. Internally and externally, the message does not come from the church. It comes from external. It comes from an outside source. So even within the movement, the message came from the UK to the leadership of this movement. You also have an external source that is bringing this message in to unite church and state. But he is a far-right Christian who has his own agenda, as I think it was Sister Donna that said. He's a conservative Christian with an agenda. And that is brought together and brought unity within the evangelicals and the Republicans together.
I don't think you have to be a pastor to represent the Christian aspect of it, because all the people who are the evangelicals who support Trump, who are pushing him to make this, they represent the church part of it too, but they're not leaders. It's the faith thing and the
what I'm looking at is just looking at past church and state relationships. And when you're looking at the papacy back in 538 or 530 or whatever, 508 or whatever it was, the papacy, the Pope represented the church. He was the representative. And then, was it Justinian or Clovis or whoever it was, represented the state. You had two leaders, of one leader of the state, one leader of the church. To have Clovis was, I don't know if we use Clovis or Justinian, but I think they both considered themselves Christian or whatever, but they still didn't represent the church in that agreement. So when we're looking at a uniting of church and state, which would mark a Sunday law, I struggle to see, and maybe you guys are fine with it, I'm just struggling to see how someone who is representing the state, who identifies as a Christian, is actually representing the church. I don't see how one person can identify as both as a union, because you have to have two.
Well, how was it in Ellen White's time with slavery? Because it wasn't just the leadership, it was all the people who wanted, and politicians who wanted slaves that were Christian at that time.
When do you mark Sunday law in the Millerite line?
The 1844, October 22nd, wasn't that one?
No, that was close of probation.
That's close of probation.
63? 61 to 65? I thought that was I don't know, I'm so confused with that. But slavery was their Sunday law then, and then you had a literal one in the 1888 history. So you have two histories of Sunday laws in their history, and we know that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look back at that and try to see.
But if we're looking at the slavery history, we're not looking at 1888, because 1888 was the second go at it. So in the first part of the line, the Sunday law, what did we second Advent was marked at what, 1863?
Yeah.
And 1844, it's weird.
From what I remember, that was the year that they put Sunday law in, I thought.
1863?
No,
Or,
1884.
but that was the close of probation.
Oh, probation. 1863, it was the Union of Church and State. And then when you trace the history of the Union of Church and State, it began in 1863.
But we're talking about the line of slavery, it was the second Advent.
You're talking about
The history of slavery, for that history was the second Advent.
Because
What's the point in bringing that?
the point is, I think Adriana brought up the Millerite line just to find out where the uniting of church and state was marking their Sunday law. But it's kind of unclear with that line. Remember, we're using Millerite line is kind of difficult.
I think no, because the thing is that those are the two alpha histories where that law was trying to get passed in a time period of modern Israel. Because if you're looking at the 1260 our line isn't gonna look exactly like that, and Parminder has said that multiple times. It's gonna look a little bit different. It's always.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's why I'm saying it's difficult to make a comparison between the Millerite line and our line.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was just a question. I didn't expect that anyone would maybe have the answer, but just for church and state, for me, I've struggled to, I think we've always wrestled with 2014 as a Sunday law, trying to understand it. I think that there's probably maybe more of an explanation there.
I really thought Sister Adriana came to an answer on how she recognized that 2014 was indeed a Sunday law, and it was through the union of church and state. But I guess there is more to be, you know.
Wasn't there some sort of beginning of destroying the Declaration of Independence and that document that separates church and state? I mean,
Johnson Amendment.
no, I mean, that's the beginning when you're starting, because the Declaration of Independence, that secured the separation of church and state, but now they're destroying it. And so when that becomes destroyed, there now has the unification of church and state, which is the symbol of the beast.
The Declaration of Independence separated Britain from the United States. That was their separation, or their breakup letter to Britain. It didn't have anything to do with church and state, as far as I
I
understand.
think you talked about the Constitution.
Constitution, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Well, now that I'm thinking about the moral majority and all of that, the moral majority, and I know Kathy McGraw, she said the Dominion is, and I forget how she said it, but she said that group, and I'm forgetting how she explained it on that. And then you have, of course, for our time, the Project Blitz, and how they're trying to, in ways put church and state together. But from all of that building up, that whole group of evangelicals, of people wanting to keep the conservative mindset, and how they got involved into politics through that whole history of the moral majority and all of that kind of stuff, and really trying to make America great again, in quotation marks, through making it a Christian nation, going back to it being a so-called Christian nation, in which it never really was. So all of that and building into, I think, 2014, and that and how that all led up to it, I think right there it culminated into a formation of some kind of church.
Image of the beast.
Yeah, through Cambridge, through that whole Steve Bannon, and
this gives us external events that took place following the threads from 1989 to 90, 91, following those threads going all the way to 2012, and then going into 2014. It's giving us these threads to follow of what they're setting up as the image of the beast. And Steve Bannon is the one that saw the way to save the Republican Party, and the Republican Party are made up a good part of far-right Christians. And that's what he was, far-right Christian. So they're bringing together this union of church and state, and SEL and Cambridge Analytica is the tool that they were using to do it.
Yeah, whatever happened to the Johnson Act? Didn't Trump try to destroy that?
Yeah, the Johnson Amendment. I was just reading. I was reading an article. Go ahead.
That was to keep the separation of church and state. He's killing it.
So in order to bring together church and state, to bring that marriage together, you have to use political means. And that means religious people, whether you're a politician or not, you have to use, in order to bring the destruction of the Constitution and force church and state on the people, you must use political means.
Yeah.
So that's why church and state is a wicked entity, and Christ never involved himself with Rome. Never. He never did.
And the Johnson Amendment, because somebody, I know who it was, somebody posted an article that Pastor Tug posted and I was reading it, but it was let me see if I can find it. Huh? It was written by Trump. And give me just a second and I'll find it.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, keeping them away.
Was Johnson married, repealed?
I don't know.
Johnson.
Yeah, yeah. And if I can find it quick, I will, and if not, then we'll break for lunch. Trying to remember who it was. Randy Brooks. Nope, that's not the one, but he's the one that said it. But it was Pastor Doug posted a letter. He's talking about how he's always been a member of this group that whatever, and he gets a letter from the president. They all get a letter from the president. I wonder if I can find it on his page. Because they have a completely different concept, and I think we know that. They have a completely different concept of what the church, union of church and state is. I'm almost there. Yeah, here it is. And this is, and I'm going to skip what Pastor Doug said, and I'll just read a portion of this letter. And if anybody wants me to send it to him, I can. I think I can just copy and paste it. And he's talking about this Religious Freedom Day that Trump has made. Regardless of your political persuasion, I thought Christians everywhere would be interested in today's press release. And this was the 15th or the 16th. Religious Freedom Day 2020 by the President of the United States. And it didn't even sound like there's no way he wrote this, because it sounded, well, we know he doesn't write anyways himself. But from its opening pages, the story of America has been rooted in the truth that all men and women are endowed with the right to follow their conscience, worship freely, and live in accordance with their convictions. On Religious Freedom Day, we honor the foundational link between freedom and faith in our country and reaffirm our commitment to safeguarding the religious liberty of all Americans. Religious freedom in America, often referred to as our first freedom, was a driving force behind some of the earliest defining moments of our American identity. The desire for religious freedom impelled the pilgrims to leave their homes in Europe and journey to a distant land, and it is the reason so many others seeking to live out their faith or change their faith have made America their home. More than 230 years ago, the Virginia General Assembly passed the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which was authored and championed by Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson famously expounded that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities. This statute served as a catalyst for the First Amendment, which enshrined in law our conviction to prevent government interference in religion. More than 200 years later, thanks to the power of that amendment, America is one of the most religiously diverse nations in the world. How can he say that? He kicks people out, right? Since I took office, my administration has been committed to protecting religious liberty. In May 2017, I signed an executive order to advance religious freedom for individuals and institutions, and I stopped the Johnson Amendment from interfering with pastors' rights to speak their minds. So now the pastors have a right to speak their mind. Lost my place. Over the last 3 years, the Department of Justice has obtained 14 convictions in cases involving attacks or threats against places of worship to fight the rise of anti-Semitism in our country. I signed an executive order last month to ensure that federal agencies are using non-discrimination authorities to combat this venomous bigotry. I have also made clear that my administration will not tolerate the violation of any American's ability to worship freely and openly and to live as his or her faith commands. I'm not going to keep reading it, but if you guys wanted a copy of it.
Doesn't include Muslims?
No. Wait, let me go back. I'll go back in one more paragraph and we'll get to the Muslims. My administration also remains cognizant of stark realities for people seeking religious liberty abroad and has made protecting religious minorities a core pillar of my administration's foreign policy. Repressive governments persecute religious worshipers using high-tech surveillance, mass detention, and torture. while terrorist organizations carry out barbaric violence against innocent victims on account of their religion. To cast a light on these abuses, in July 2019, I welcomed survivors of religious persecution from 16 countries in the Oval Office. These survivors included Christians, Jews, and Muslims who all shared similar stories of persecution. At the United Nations in September, I called on global leaders to take concrete steps to prevent state and non-state actors from attacking citizens for their beliefs and to help ensure the sanctity and safety of places of worship. And last summer, the State Department convened its second ministerial to advance religious freedom, where our diplomats engaged in a broad range of stakeholders in government and civil society, both religious and secular, to identify concrete ways to combat religious persecution and discrimination around the world and ensure greater respect for freedom of religion and belief. On this Religious Freedom Day, we reaffirm our commitment to protecting the precious and fundamental right of religious freedom, both at home and abroad. Our founders entrusted the American people with the responsibility to protect religious liberty so that our nation may stand as a bright beacon for the rest of the world. Today, we remain committed to that sacred endeavor and strive to support those around the world who still struggle under oppressive regimes and impose restrictions on freedom and religion. Now, therefore, I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim January 16, 2020 as a Religious Freedom Day. I call on all Americans to commemorate this day with events and activities that remind us of our shared heritage of religious liberty and that teach us how to secure this blessing both at home and around the world.
That was Thursday.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything about Religious Day anywhere.
Yeah, me neither.
Me neither.
Anyways, it's almost 1:45.
So he says, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand this 15th day of January 15th in the year of our Lord 2020 and of the independence of the United States of America, the 245th. Donald J. Trump. So he hits on the Johnson Amendment. That's what rang my bell on that article, on the Johnson Amendment or letter, that they're allowed to express their religion. So,
You gotta close.
yeah, I don't believe he read that either. Who wrote that, Susan? Yeah, I don't believe he wrote that either. There's no way when I read it, he's not intelligent enough to write that articulate, if that's the right way to say it. I'm not that intelligent myself either, but.
Just a comment to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I Googled it. I don't have a website or anything, but Google it on Trump's Religious Freedom Day. And there's another point on it that he's really been pushed to do because of the evangelicals behind him, is about prayer in school. And it gives you the details on it in information that you can find from that article that you just read, as well as if you just Google it.
So
2020 January. I don't have the article in front of me. No. I mean, what you read was, yeah, you probably have something to look for on that, but you can Google just that particular thought on Religious Freedom Day. Just January 16th, 2020. And it goes into detail about it, what it covers. And on the top of the list is prayer in school. And it means it's not that teachers can lead out with prayer, but anyone in this public school system, children, whatever age they are, can pray whenever they want to pray.
Yeah, and he also just changed the, interesting enough, linking the two, he also overturned what Michelle Obama did with the schools and the cafeterias and the food, and I don't know if anybody read that too.
Yes, I read that too.
That she
doing away with all the fruits and vegetables, a healthier diet.
And bringing in more French fries and junk food and
Pizza.
milk and sodium.
And pizza.
And because the people are complaining that they're throwing away too much food. So they don't want to throw away food. So instead, let's give them all the junk food because they don't throw that away.
Exactly.
So I emailed the article to myself because it's a long article. What I'll do is I'll put it in the email when I send out the audio. If that works for everybody. I don't have the email address this one. I might be able to do that from here. We'll see. But let's break for lunch. And maybe Brother Renee, would you like to pray, close in prayer, and pray over the food as well?
Okay, now.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for bringing us through this morning. The great abundance of knowledge and wisdom that we're learning. It is so great. We ask that you protect us over our lunch period and graciously bless our food that we're going to eat. And let everybody have a safe return to our upcoming hour. We ask this in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen.
We'll be back at 2:50.